Hi, and welcome back for session number 2. Today we're going to talk about work. We've all got to do it, so we might as well get good at it. Now, we know that very few of us use this much paper any longer, but the sentiment we feel is the same. Overwhelm, stress, we all feel it. On top of which, we are all attempting to produce value. For all ambitious people, producing value is what drives us. Might be useful then to have a common definition of value. We claim value is the rate you produce a result. That result must balance two elements. First, speed. Second, quality. Makes sense, right? Consider, if you deliver a project 2 weeks early, but it is terrible quality, that has no value. Conversely, if you deliver a high quality product, but it's 2 weeks late, that has no value. So our objective here is to give you a framework that focuses on both parts of value, by working first on the efficiency of your speaking, and then secondly on the accuracy of your language. Both elements must be addressed if we are to produce value for you. So the goal then of this exercise is simple. It is to help you save time. None of you have the time to be listening to this recording, and we know that. You are a busy, productive person. We had better deliver something that makes your life easier, not harder. As we prepare to do this, please keep in mind the big picture, namely that people were built to come together with other people in order to coordinate the action and produce a future different than the current present. And, over the years, we continue to invent wonderful tools that give us the capacity to do more in less time, including language, as we talked about, resulting in an era where the networks are now up and running just fine. It's the people that must speed up in order to keep pace or risk being replaced. That's the context, that's the big picture. With all of this in mind, let's dig in. Best thing to do first is to make sure we all have a common definition of work. So think about all of the tasks on your to-do list. Where do those tasks come from? Well, if you think about it, everything on your list is a promise made to a request. And our definition drives that point home. All work is making requests of yourself and others to promise, and managing your promises plus their promises to completion. If you think about our discussion on language from last week, what we are doing now is focusing in on the two performatives that will make up 60 to 80% of your day, requests and promises. If you and your team do not have a common approach, a framework for managing these two performatives, then your capacity to deliver value is jeopardized, regardless of how much connectivity you have. So think for a minute about our definition of work. Now put yourself in our shoes for a minute and think about all of the people we have met through the years doing business coaching. One of the experiences we have is that most people are running around so hastily that their capacity to manage this process is diminished. Everything feels like a fire drill. That's why we issue this challenge to our clients. Namely, if there's not enough time to do work right at the beginning, why is there always time to do it over, do things ourselves, have everything feel like a fire drill? In spite of this, the really good news is that there are only 5 elements to effective workflow. And by understanding all 5, you and your team can easily install our framework for more effectiveness. The 5 elements are a speaker, a listener, time, conditions of satisfaction, and something we call an already listening. Let's go through each for a couple of minutes. Let's start first with looking at the speaker. First thing we want you to do in the space you have in your workbook there is write down speaker versus talker. Without saying anything more, you should already have an idea of where we are going. What do you think the difference is? Right. A speaker is someone who is using language for action. A talker is someone who is throwing words around into the atmosphere, hoping that their future works out. And as you've probably heard before, hope is not a business strategy. The point is, be present when you are looking to coordinate action with other people. To the extent you are, you have a much better opportunity to achieve the future you want. Once we have you present, then we can focus on the fundamental requirements for a speaker, which are, number 1, the speaker must be accountable for making a clear request, which is what we're talking about, and number 2, the speaker must be accountable for managing the request to completion. Number 1 is obvious, and we'll look at the specifics in a minute. Number 2, however, sneaks up on people. Here is what we mean. Have you ever asked somebody to do something, then thought to yourself, whew, I'm done with that? If so, then you did not follow requirement number 2 here and may have been burned. To be clear, we are not suggesting that you have to micromanage every promise you get from others, nor are we suggesting that there are no consequences for listeners who don't keep their promises. Instead, we want you to see a direct connection between your request today and the future you intend tomorrow. See, if you are asking someone for help, in other words, making a request, then you are doing so because you have a future you intend, one that you are striving for. Be more committed to that future than to having your reason why you don't have your future. If you ask somebody for something by a certain time, call before the deadline. Check in. Ask that person if they are still on track. Take the ball back if you don't think they're going to deliver. The point is, if your future doesn't happen, it's shame on you. Be a committed person to the future you intend. Okay, now that we have a speaker, we must focus in on the listener. And the first important aspect to consider here is that the speaker must engage the listener. For any of you who have children, this picture makes clear what we're saying, right? In a work context, this means that as a speaker, before you worry about framing the request properly, you have to make sure that the listener is actually listening. Think about those instances when someone you work with has started talking to you while you were on the phone. This is an example of not engaging you as a listener. The recommendations here may help clarify the point. First, think about the person you are meeting with in person or over the phone. Try saying something like, "Is this a good time for you?" If you and your teammates begin using a signal like this, you will find very quickly that your request-promise exchanges are either more efficient or not had until both parties are ready to be efficient. Even more importantly today, think about the email or the instant message exchanges you engage in daily. What about this scenario? Have you ever received that email addressed to you and 5 other people that says, "Hey, could one of you guys kind of sort of think about helping me out on this project? You know, ASAP, I'd really appreciate it, smiley face, smiley face." What do you do with that email when you get it? Yeah, trash, right? Well, that is an example of how connectivity alone through computer technology will not make us more prosperous. You and your colleagues had better be able to incorporate the fundamentals of work that we're talking about now into your emailing and instant messaging. So our recommendations in this domain are threefold. First, pick one person as the recipient. Second, you can CC others, but call one person into the conversation. Third, put the word request in the subject line, then a colon, then you can say whatever else you want. If you and your colleagues will try this, you will begin to put each other on notice that a performative conversation is being initiated, which means you should be able to pull someone who gets 100 plus emails a day, as we all do, into the same conversation. And that is the important point here. Please write this down. 90% of successful workflow is just getting the speaker and the listener to be in the same conversation. If we do that, the rest of the process is relatively smooth sailing. Now, speaking of the rest of the process, let's look at the time element. Consider, the most frequently neglected component of a request itself is time. It is important for both parties to reach a meeting of the minds as to the deadline. Instead, we end up using phrases like right away, ASAP, and next week, which all have different interpretations by different speakers and listeners. We'll go one step further and actually equate these terms with viruses in your workflow process. Take a look at these terms now on the screen and begin to imagine your life without ever using them again. That's what we're going to ask you to consider. The same way that sometimes you need to bring in your IT person to clean out a virus on your computer, we want you to imagine removing these terms from your vocabulary. Remember, the networks are up and running, it's you that needs to be upgraded. And part of that upgrade is the removal of viruses. Here is what we mean. Think about each of those terms and the problems that they create for those around us. First, right away. No one knows what this really means. Does that mean now, 10 minutes from now, or by end of business? Second, ASAP. And this is typically the worst of all 3 viruses. Think about this example. Imagine that you are someone who takes in a request from one person on your team with the deadline of ASAP. Seems harmless, right? Then, within the next 30 minutes, suddenly you get hit with 5 or 6 more requests from other people on the team, all with the deadline of ASAP. What is going to be the hardest thing for you to do right now? Right, prioritize. You're going to guess. But think about what we talked about earlier, namely that the speaker is making that request of you because they have a future they intend. That speaker has now put their future in your hands, and you have to guess at the priority of when you'll do it? Truthfully, this particular outcome is not fair to the listener, and it's not smart of the speaker to allow this to happen. Third, next week. If I ask you to do something for me next week, what day are you presumably going to choose? Right, Friday, end of business. But if I actually need it on Wednesday so that I can review it on Thursday and get it to the client by noon on Friday, then we're going to have a problem when I come into your office on Wednesday and presumably end up in a judgmental conversation. Hopefully you see the point here. If you allow these viruses to spread throughout your requests, they will dilute performance. By all means, say what you mean. Let's move next to conditions of satisfaction, the X in your X by time Y. A clear understanding of conditions of satisfaction by both parties is necessary. If you have ever walked away from a request exchange, gone back to your desk and then thought to yourself, I have no idea what she just asked me to do, then thought to yourself, well, that's okay, I'll just figure it out, then you have missed out on this requirement. Our challenge going forward is that you do the request exchange properly the first time so that you don't have to do it over, guess at what was said, waste energy and time. Hey Jim, I'm sorry, I didn't quite get what you need on this project. Can we go over it one more time? If there's not enough time to take that extra 5 minutes, why is there always time to do something wrong or do it in the wrong order, then do it again, have a fire drill, etc.? The dividend of using this framework is immediately paid out, but it requires an investment from both the speaker and the listener to make sure the request exchange happens properly. For a bit of perspective here, let's consider a short and a true story. Here goes. A few years ago, we worked with a property management team in Sacramento, California. One morning, one of the property management accountants came to work after picking up her rocket fuel from Starbucks, sat down at her desk and began working away at her outstanding promises. At about 8:05 in the morning, a property manager colleague came into her office and said, "Oh my goodness, one of our clients just called, and he said he needs his full budget ASAP." Even if you can't relate specifically to the topic, suffice it to say that this was a huge request, and was going to require this accountant to work all day nonstop on this one request, which was going to make all of her other outstanding promises fall behind. So on the outside she looked like this, and on the inside she felt like this. Then she thought of this framework, stopped her colleague before he left her office and asked him, "What is the client trying to do?" Any guesses what her colleague said? "Yeah, I don't know." In the vernacular we are using today, what she was saying was, "Look, I'm ready to be a listener. Can I please get a speaker to join me in the conversation?" Her colleague, on the other hand, was essentially saying, I wasn't a listener in the conversation with the client, and I didn't ask him really to be a speaker. I just took in this request. It's a hot potato, so I'm throwing it to you now, and I'm going to go get some coffee. Good luck with that. And this is what's passing as workflow. To the accountant's credit, she stayed with it. She asked, well, is it okay if I get the client on the phone? Her colleague told her that if she called that client, he would be upset. But she decided to risk it. And this is good learning for all of us, because if you think your clients are any better at this request promise process, you're crazy. So she called the client, got him on the phone, talked to him for 5 minutes, during which time he realized that all he needed was the capital budget. The accountant was already done with the capital budget, so she sent it to him at 8:15 in the morning. The client was thrilled, the accountant looked like a champ, and she saved herself 7 hours and 45 minutes of time. And ultimately, that is the point of the story. Using this map will save you time. Not 7 hours and 45 minutes of time per request, but 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. And when you add it all up, that's time enough to do another deal or spend a little more time with the family. That's prosperity. Moving on to the final element now, let's look at what we call an already listening. Here is what we mean. All individuals, teams, companies, etc. have certain assumptions upon which their requests are made. Think about when you first joined the organization where you work now. Presumably you had the experience of being in a meeting when someone said something, everyone else knew exactly what he or she was talking about, and you had no clue. This frame of reference that everyone else took for granted was completely foreign to you. That's what we mean by an already listening. Here's a non-work related example that may help. Imagine if I came and picked you up at your office today and we flew to New York City and went to a bar and requested 2 beers. Our beers would come ice cold. Then if we flew over to London, went to a pub and ordered 2 pints, our pints there would come room temperature. In the US versus the UK, there is a different already listening about what temperature is best for a beer. In a work context, the point is rather simple. The further away you get from the people you coordinate action with the most, the more specific you must be with your requests. If we want a cold beer in London, we had better not assume the same frame of reference, and we'd better be more specific with our requests. This would be true for you at work when you bring on a new teammate, work with outside parties, and when you work with your clients. Don't assume everybody has the same already listening. So if we go back to our map now, let's look at where we are. First thing is to make sure that we all understand that the dark blue boxes apply to the speaker and the light blue boxes apply to the listener, and that the map is moving from left to right over time. So far we have looked at the first 3 boxes. We've had a speaker engage the listener, take into account the already listening, and lay out the request in some form of I request X by time frame Y. Now let's look at the options available to the listener and what happens next. Essentially, there are 4 available options for the listener. The first one sometimes surprises people, and that option is a decline. I still love and respect you, and I'm open to future conversations, but as it relates to this request, my answer is no. This will obviously catch the speaker off guard, but at least we are having a real conversation and potentially a negotiation. People aren't just saying yes when they know they can't deliver. The 2 instances where it is appropriate to say no are number 1, when you just physically cannot deliver, or 2, when you might not be the best person for the job. We are not encouraging mutiny. We are pushing for teams to be more authentic with each other from the start. The second option available to a listener is, of course, acceptance. Acceptance means that you accept both the conditions of satisfaction and the time frame. Now you see that after acceptance there is a line that shoots out of that box headed toward report complete. This line represents the listener working like a busy bee to execute on the promise he or she has made. Now you notice that there are 2 forks in the road. These are important, so let's spend a minute or 2 here. The first fork points down to revoke request. This, of course, applies to the speaker. It's a dark blue box. Here's what it means. Say your client calls you on Monday morning and asks for a certain report by Friday at noon. You pick up the phone and call me and ask me to do a section of the report by Wednesday into business. On Tuesday, your client calls you and tells you that the meeting has been canceled. The moment you get off that call with your client, you are going to call me to revoke your request. Otherwise, I will be left working on something that's unnecessary. Doing this work for many years, we have found that 98% of the time, colleagues are revoking requests for each other. Don't know if this is out of respect or what, but we should all make sure to do this. It is the other fork in the road that is more critical because for some reason people don't do this one as well as the revoke request. Here at the revoke promise box we are talking about the listener. The best way to understand what this box really means is to look at it this way. Think about the last time someone did not deliver on a promise that was made to you. Even if you followed up beforehand, the deadline still came and went, and then you had to chase that person to find out what happened. Your trust in that person diminished. Their relationship with you tarnished. Well, keep that in mind, because if you let deadlines go, the same thing happens to your personal brand with others. By the same token, there is no way that you have kept all of your promises in the last month. Not possible if you're an ambitious person. That said, there is one promise from this point forward you should never ever break. And that is, if you are going to break a promise, you promise to let the speaker know before the promise is due. If you and your teammates will sign a blood oath to never breaking that one promise, you will see an increase in your personal and your team brands right away. Back to the other 2 available responses now. The third option available to the listener is a counteroffer, which means that you are negotiating. This requires the listener to have some structure in place whereby they can see and manage all of their outstanding promises. And finally, there is a response called commit to commit later, which is for that situation when you simply cannot respond to a request in the moment because you are in the middle of a fire drill, so you ask for a bit of time. You must add a time frame and tell the speaker by when you will let them know, otherwise we forget with all that we have going on. So that's it. That's the name of that tune. Hopefully you see that this is a tangible framework, one that can be assimilated right away into your day-to-day operations. Obviously we are not encouraging you to be a robot, but whether in person, over the phone, through email or instant message or any other means, it is imperative that you get all of the elements of effective workflow into your exchanges with others. Take this map out and try it with others. You will not be disappointed. And with that, we are done, except for your practice assignments. And again, we want you to be as happy as this gentleman is to work on your assignments this week, keeping in mind that they're designed to help you keep the learning alive. Please plan to complete your assignments no later than end of business the day before our next application meeting. We will look forward to it. Thank you for listening, and now get back in the game.